Welcome to Frankly Speaking. This is a new podcast on responsible business by Frank Bold, the European public interest law firm. And I'm Richard Howard, and after several years of debating these issues inside the European Parliament, I'm hosting our discussions of the latest political, legal and business developments in the field of corporate sustainability, business and human rights. Today, Frankly Speaking welcomes Wim Bartels, member of the Sustainability Reporting Board, which is setting the new European standards for corporate sustainability reporting. And Wim is Senior Sustainability Partner at the accountancy firm Deloitte, and formerly for 20 years in another member of the Big Four, KPMG, where he also led the sustainability practice. Wim is a good old friend and colleague, and when we worked together getting the major voluntary sustainability reporting frameworks to align in what was called the Corporate Reporting Dialogue, he was also a member of the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure and is chair of the Sustainability Policy Group at Accountancy Europe. In his profile, Wim describes himself as, quote, being at the forefront of developments to come, unquote. Knowing Wim, I think that is actually true. Well, welcome to Frankly Speaking.
Right. Well, thank you, Richard, and good to hear you again in this Frankly Speaking podcast. First of all, thanks for inviting.
Let's go straight to the European standards. It's really an exciting moment. Congratulations on being appointed to the new Sustainability Reporting Board at EFRAG. Just to explain the jargon for new listeners, the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, and this is the body that's setting the standards or advising and recommending the standards to the European Commission on what nearly 50,000 companies will have to report on sustainability under the new directive that's been passed. So before we get into too much detail, just for people who are outside of the process, why are the European standards so important? And what are your own aspirations for them?
Yeah, well, first of all, to put it in the wider context of the European ambitions that I think many will know of, the EU Green Deal, the ambition to become a real sustainable economy is the ultimate goal. Now, as part of that, the EU has considered that disclosures would be of critical relevance to understand where we are and where we are heading to, so that we can track progress, and that also stakeholders can take their decision based on that information. And then in terms of what should we do with the disclosures, for me, having worked in it for a long time, I have seen the non-comparability. To an extent, I like it. Every company is unique, but we also need some level of comparability to understand whether companies are on the right track, whether they are taking action, whether they have included it in their governance. And therefore, my aspiration would be to get that harmonized, whilst at the same time, and this is where the challenge is, not to overburden companies with only disclosure, because disclosure is also really the end, if you like, of the process. So companies should do that as a result of all their actions and not stop there. So that is my other aspiration, to make it a balanced set of standards.
Yeah, and now let's get into a bit more of the detail. The board has obviously started work. The exposure drafts of standards were actually prepared by a project task force before you came into being, but you've begun looking at the public consultation which has taken place about them. And of course, the European Commission has set a timetable where it wants to publish the standards following your deliberations, following all the consultation, as soon as November this year. So I know you're working, and you and your colleagues are working hard on this. Can you give us some insight into how it's going? You know, what are the sorts of discussions you're having?
Yeah, sure. So the board, consisting of representatives from many perspectives. I'm representing a kind of the accountancy profession. The different perspectives gives, first of all, great insights from the various roles. So, for example, those from SMEs are in many cases kind of forgotten in this game, because it's all about the large companies, etc., etc. But we have an SME perspective in the board. I think it is fair to say that the process is going as well as it can go, if I may say.
He's smiling at that, folks. I see him. You don't, but I see him smiling at that. So that's what's behind that then? Go on, tell us. Give us a little bit of colour.
It is very challenging in terms of timeline. It means that we also don't have that much time to yet think things over, to have initial discussions, to just see what this is all about. So everything goes at a very high pace, and that also comes with challenges in terms of some board members who say like, but we need to address the critical topics now, and others who go like, but I need to understand the process, and others saying, but I need to have first an insight on what this is really all about. So we have different views in that regard. And in terms of content, this is also coming from outreach events. There are some serious concerns, I think I have to say, topics we need to discuss. One of them relates to this is too much, right? Some say this is too much. At a minimum, we need a phase-in. So a couple of years to get companies to work on it and fully comply. Others are also saying, and I'm one of them, which is about materiality and not so much the concept, right? The concept is good. We need to look at both the impacts of companies and the risks that they face for sustainability topics. But it's more like, how do we apply these standards? Do we need to really report on all of this and then only take out the ones that we can rebut, as it is called within the exposure draft? Or should we build up and say, as companies, define the material topics and that's what we report on? And that's all related to the burden of reporting. That is where real discussions are already taking place, and those are a few real fundamental points, I think, in the standards.
On that speed issue, it's obviously not just in the outreach events, it's generally you hear some in business, for example, the stakeholders in the European Securities and Markets Authority, ESMA, who say definitely slow it down a bit, although the timetable is in the legislation now. It should be said, with the first reports due as soon as 2024 for those who already do so, but you get that lobbying, I suppose, that it's going too fast. But you then also see lobbying that, given the 2030 sustainability development goals, it's gone backwards on some of those because of COVID, given the fact that we are on the edge of failing on 1.5 degrees and the Paris Agreement, and we must move much further and faster. All the discussions around COP26 last year, for example, and we've got to move faster, not slower. Where do you personally stand on that?
I have, of course, worked for a long time with companies and particularly larger companies. So I know from that practice how difficult it is to implement any indicator or disclosure element within a company if you have more than one side, so to say. And these large companies have, of course. So from that perspective, I completely understand the extension of the timelines. From the perspective of the challenges that we face, I'm with you, right? It needs to go as fast as possible. And what I'm personally in favor of is to have the timeline as short as 2024 for those under the NFRD. For the other ones, personally, I would also have required them to implement by 2024, because my concern is that many of these non-listed companies mainly will wait until 2024 and then say, oh, by next year I need to report. Now I need to do something. And then we are really too late. So what I would really encourage, and let's see whether I can also propose that through the board discussions, is to mandate by 2024, 2025 as now required, but then encourage companies to adopt as soon as possible, or as feasible is maybe a better word. That is what I would really propose.
And of course, lots of those companies are listening to this podcast, so you've been encouraging them to do that in this very discussion. Thanks for being as clear on that. Now, we're obviously not going to get into very detailed draft by draft discussion on all the different standards that have come out, but just for our audience, there are cross-cutting standards, and then there are topical standards broken down into environmental, social governance, ESG, and they range from everything from circular economy to workers in the supply chain to responsible business conduct. So where I think that the reasonable question to ask you is, where do you think there will be major changes, or where do you predict there may be, it's obviously a maybe major changes in what ultimately gets agreed compared with the drafts we've all seen?
Yeah, I think a couple of elements. First of all, this rebuttable presumption that we already touched upon. Secondly, the phasing in. So what may come out of the discussions and the consultations is to mandate a limited number of disclosure requirements for all companies, and then for others to take these on board in years to come. Thirdly, the application guidance currently is effectively a disclosure requirement. It's stated like that. And that conflicts, of course, with the word of guidance. So I think we really have to look into that, because that makes it so detailed in terms of the requirements that companies would have to adhere to. So that may change. And then also with respect to phasing in, I think the scope 3, so the value chain impacts in particular, will, I think, see some change. Final point, last not least, is the level of alignment with further international standards. Of course, in particular the ISSB. There are just seemingly small differences. It's just a word here and there. It's just a term. But I think Richard, and you may reflect on that. We know from the corporate reporting dialogue that the same meaning with different words can really create significant issues, if I may say so, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously I wrote something earlier this year about the relationship between the European standards and the new emerging global standards under the International Sustainability Standards Board. One of the big differences between them, of course, is this double materiality of that Europe adopts, impact as well as financial impact on the company, impact on people and planet, and single materiality, which is ultimately about value creation for the company and has a greater financial lens. When I wrote about that, I said that perhaps it was less an either or than it appeared to be at the time, and it will converge. So that's, unpublished, and that's what I've said about it. But there are different views about it. What's your own view?
I'm fully behind double materiality. I believe that for companies going forward, we're not only interested in their financial performance and then the longer term risk and or opportunities. We also need to understand where they have an impact on society, even if investors would not value it yet, so to say. And there's even, I think, a further argument for this is if we don't report on the impacts, investors will never integrate it into their valuation, because they won't see it unless physically the effects become apparent. So I really think we need to start as early as possible with the impacts, and with it also a bit educating the investors that some of these might turn out to be a risk on the shorter term than they may have expected or think of. So I'm fully behind that double materiality concept, absolutely.
And investors listening to Frankly Speaking, please note. Let's just, you mentioned it twice, this rebuttal presumption concept. It's a new invention of the European draft standards. Could you explain what it means as you understand it, but also why you think it might change?
Yeah. So first, it originates from the financial reporting standards. So in financial reporting standards, you have certain standards on, let's say in certain asset categories where within the standard, you are required to report on certain elements, but you may decide to rebut them if you think it's not relevant for your company. So that's where it comes from. And that has been a kind of transferred, if you like, to this concept. It works essentially like this. If you have 100 requirements, then you need to report on all of these, unless you think that certain of these 100 requirements are not applicable to you, they are not material. So therefore, you are able to what is called rebut them, and then you have to explain why that disclosure requirement is not material for you. That's the concept, so to say. That's the approach. The concern with it, in essence, is that this would lead to a lot of reporting about why companies do not report on certain elements. It creates a lot of work because if you say, for me, hazardous waste is not a material topic, for example, a material requirement, you need to explain why is that not important for you? And then you say, well, because I don't have products with hazardous waste. Well, then you go, can you prove that you don't have products with hazardous waste? Or you get into quite a difficult argument, I think. And then in the end, the question for the user is, and then so what, right? Does it really help you? Where if you have a good, that's an assumption here and a critical condition. If you have a good materiality process, strong with good governance and controls, etc., then you'll get to the same result, but in a positive way. So that's the key, concern, if you like, and objection also. So I would think that is up for discussion. It is, and that it may change. I say this a bit cautiously, but I sense a lot of opposition to that.
Yeah, and of course, everything we're in the midst of the process. So I'm grateful you're sharing your views, and we can't say for certain. Now let's broaden this out to the accountancy profession. I think it is fair to say that you're one of the leading accountants in the world working on this subject. And you're, of course, closely tied into thinking amongst accountants through your role at Accountancy Europe. And again, on the one hand, you get the optimists who say that accountants are going to save the world. And we've both heard that a few times in our life. And then we also have the skeptics, often in business, who think that this is just a job-creating exercise for accountants and they're going to just get more money out of this.
Yeah.
And so thinking specifically from what is the accountant's contribution and what is the accountancy perspective on all of this, how would you answer that?
I'm very pleased with the voice, if you like, of the representative body for the European accountants bodies, the Accountancy Europe, who says, like, we really believe that this is the next big thing for the economy, not for accountants, for the economy. Having said that, it's definitely not the case that all accountants across Europe and abroad are, let's say, behind this concept or understand it. And just to be fair on that, I have some concern there that we may not get to the result that we need, which is accountants who help with making sure that the information that goes out is right, relevant, and complete. Particularly relevant and complete is where the issue is, I think. The accountant's role, in my view, is to make sure that in this standard setting process is to make sure that they help with looking into the criteria. Is it sufficiently robust? That is accountants' expertise. And then after that, to make sure that the assurance standards that should come after this are sufficient to get to this accurate but then relevant and complete result. If accountants only, in the end of the day, would say the information is correct, full stop, then I think we are not doing a proper job. We should take the role to talk to our companies, our auditees, and say, yeah, this is great, but now your transition plan is not complete, right? You don't have underlying investments. What are you going to do about that? to have that, real more business focused conversation, if you like. So that is what I would hope we get the accountants profession towards, and it is a big challenge. I should say that. Yeah.
Let me pick you up on what you said there about assurance. So again, the surveys show that an increasing number of sustainability reports today do get some form of third-party assurance, compared with very few only a short while ago. But I think it's fair to say that you're a trailblazer or a pioneer in this. You've I think, undertaken assurance of sustainability reports for more than 40 European-based multinationals. So that's a very, very big portfolio of experience that you bring to this. And yet this is new in the European legislation. Those 49,000 companies that are going to be covered by it, they're going to need an audit as part of the process. Again, some will say that there just aren't enough accountants today who have the skills to do this. The European Commission would say it shouldn't necessarily be the accountants that are doing this. And yet you get other people that say, the big problem with sustainability reporting is quality and whether it's at the right level for investors. So one way or another, we have to crack that nut. Help us on is that possible, and how will it be possible?
Yes, there are too few accountants who understand this. Far too few to serve the 49,000. My very personal view on this is the accountants will not get it right in the first year or years. We will have to be on a journey and over time improve and learn on how to do this. We can't find the people. I know of several educational programs that want to focus on reporting and assurance, and they can't find the teachers. And as you can imagine, they have invited me also to help with that. But I said, sorry, I have another job to do at this very moment.
Folks, accountants will save the world, and just email Wim Bartels and Deloitte. He'll do it for all of us. Time is running very short, but I don't want us to end without talking a bit not about what we did in the corporate reporting dialogue, but it was a fascinating moment in history.
Yeah.
It was actually technical people working together, and we did get each of them internationally to align to the recommendations of the Task Force for Climate-related Financial Disclosure. I'm deeply proud of that, and you should be as well. So we didn't think, even 3 and 4 years ago, that things would go as fast as they would. Today, SASB, the International Integrated Reporting Council, Carbon Disclosure Standards Boards, they've all merged into the global standard setting process. We couldn't predict that at the time. And I wonder, looking back, what was it that made this go faster?
I reflected on this and go, what happened here? We were getting to know each other. We know each other's differences, etc. And it wasn't always an easy time, right? But that sheer fact, I think, was important. And as you say, that bringing the technical people together and then realize that effectively we mean the same, we are there for the same objective, has helped. And that's where I think the real drive came from, is this pressure that we put. And I think also there, you and I know that we brought in some external perspectives, right? We had people from the investors community, we had people from the business community, all talking about you need to converge, you need to align, we need one standard,
Probably in 1 minute, this last answer, but I must ask you, so that next 10 years bit, how will it look different in 10 years' time? We
will see much more understanding across companies of the relevance of, call it ESG, sustainability, whatever you want to name it, by the fact that companies have to work on it. This is partly a hope, but I think also that companies will then really start to take further action to the extent they didn't already. I think we would also see a learning curve of the accountants profession. And finally, I think we will also see more standards that have become, call it, more defined than this first set to really drive that comparability. That would be about my 1 minute, I think, answer to this.
It's been a huge pleasure, as always, to spend time with you and to share views with you. We've, I'm afraid, come to the end of our podcast. I would like to invite all of our audience to send us your feedback to franklyspeaking@frankbold.org and to share our conversation. You've been listening to Frankly Speaking, the Frank Bold podcast on responsible business. Watch out for our next episode and find out more about Frank Bold's Responsible Companies section on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thanks again to Wim. We'll see you all next time, and goodbye.